Resident Evil Requiem is one of the most anticipated games of the past year, and the reviews for it have been almost completely positive, not for some small complaints. While I was listening to other reviews, I noticed my standing on the game differs heavily from how most view it. I wanted to make a video essentially playing devil's advocate to discuss where I think Resident Evil Requiem went wrong. Now, while most people would see the game as around a top 5, not the best, but definitely not the worst, I don't disagree with the position, but I think a lot of its failures are swept under the rug, so to speak. From now on, I'll be abbreviating Resident Evil Requiem just to RE9 for sake of conversation, but aside from that, I have 5 main points for the video and a few smaller tidbits I'll be snaking in at different points. And for my first point, I have the non-existent backtracking. While some games like RE5 for instance have a fun gameplay cycle without repeating locations, I think RE9 comes somewhat short. Now, this derives from the mix of gameplay, with the gameplay of survival horror for Grace's parts and the action horror of Leon's. I think Grace's parts would benefit most from a consistent location like with the older Resident Evil titles. Meanwhile, Leon's more action horror gameplay pairs well with constantly shifting environments, and in the end, instead of a compromise between the two, the game follows a shifting environment that's more geared towards action horror game progression. Now, the big question is, how is this a flaw and why does it matter? Well, in my opinion, I'd say that shifting locations can be, and is in this game, overall harmful to the survival horror aspect. The main idea of survival horror stems from the limitations you face. In Resident Evil 1, your gameplay will mainly be spent in the mansion, and each item you use will impact your run as items become more scarce. By the time you make it back to the mansion in RE1 after visiting the side mansion, your only hope for new resources is the few rooms you have left to explore. The feeling of scarcity makes the game thrilling, but in Grace's sections, you switch locations 7 times. I'm listing locations as any place you play through and then are unable to return to. And those locations are the Wrenwood Hotel, the Rhodes Hill Care Center starting area, the Rhodes Hill Care Center full, main area, and then the Rhodes Hill basement, along with the courtyard/lab. And then outside of that, you have the water treatment facility and ARC labs. And I like to say, it's fine to have points that become inaccessible later on. For example, in RE1, you can't go back to the mansion after you visit the underground lab. And same for the RPD in RE2, where it gets blocked off after entering the Nest lab. The issue is that survival horror is at its best when you are fixed around one point. Think of the Spencer Mansion, the RPD, the Baker Estate for a newer title. Having a place that feels like it progresses alongside you enhances the survival elements by a lot, and I think RE9 really misses this note. Playing Grace's parts, ammo scarcity becomes almost non-existent since you'll start to realize any new area you go to will be built around giving you enough to get through it. There will never be a time you spend all of your ammo in one section and don't have enough for the next part, since whichever area you go to next will have all the resources you need. In RE1, you need to decide which paths to clear of zombies since you'll be traversing them a lot, but don't have the ammo to kill every zombie in the mansion. But with Grace, clearing areas really doesn't matter since you won't be traversing most areas more than a single time. And this ties directly into number 2. Grace doesn't have enough forced bosses. Really, Grace only gets 2 bosses, and only one I'd count as an actual boss fight. The first and lesser being the singing zombie at Rhodes Care Facility on the east wing in the conference room. She guards a vial of acid you'll need to dissolve a lock. Her fight is basically mandatory since it's difficult to brush past her without getting hit, but it isn't fully mandatory. And the second is the girl in the water treatment facility, which comes off as really lackluster mechanically speaking. The reason I say this ties into my first point was that having bosses force you to use precious resources can really put on the pressure. For instance, the first boss, Elder Crimson Head in RE1, can really take a chunk out of your ammo, and if the fight doesn't get to you, your missing ammo will definitely. The same could be said for Jan, the snake, in the end of RE1, or well, towards it. But with Grace, you will almost never worry about ammo after a hard fight, since there really aren't any to begin with. Now, my third point does have a slight caveat to it at the end, but it still remains as a large part of an issue, that the girl in RE9 is a really bad stalker enemy. What I mean by stalker enemy is iconic enemies like Mr. X, Jack Baker, and even Lady Dimitrescu to some point. These are enemies that, like the name suggests, stalk you throughout a good portion of the game. Taking the iconic Mr. X from RE2, after coming back to the RPD after your first stint in the basement, you'll be met with a lumbering giant stomping throughout the RPD and ready and willing to chase you down at moment's notice. Same for Jack Baker in RE7. After getting through the intro and having the game fully begin, Jack Baker will roam around the mansion and chase you down in tight segments of the house. Now, I must say, even though I use Jack Baker as an example, I don't think he's a great stalker enemy either, and some of the points I'll make against the girl will apply to him. I just wanted to give some examples of the general makes of stalker enemies. The problem I have with the girl is that all of her appearances are almost completely scripted. Now, to illustrate my point, I'll walk through every appearance she has in the game. You have the first one at the start of the care center. In almost the very beginning of the game, we have a short segment where we have to find access to the rest of the care center. This part will usually only take like 10 minutes, and each time you see the girl, it will be completely scripted. You'll just have to like go to the nearest light source when she like ends her cutscene. The second appearance in the basement is mostly the same, with most of her appearances being scripted. Almost every time you see her, there will be an intended route for you to take. And finally, her boss fight in the water treatment facility. With this is technically the most free she becomes. It really only applies to like the middle of the boss fight arena. Once you find a lever, she will be completely scripted. And now, the reason I focus so heavily on her being scripted is that it makes her feel very weak compared to other stalker enemies. In the sneak peeks leading up to the release, the girl seemed like a very large part of the game, when in actuality she barely gets any time to shine. There will never be a time in RE9 that you'll have to wonder where the girl is, because the answer is she'll appear in front of you when you reach a certain point in the area. She will never add any tension to a regular area, since the areas she's in are designated as her areas. It would be like if Mr. X could only be found once you reach the second floor of the RPD to pump the jack. And aside from that, he doesn't roam around the RPD at all. Like, it wouldn't make sense. Point 4, the areas aren't interesting. I think this also has to do with the level of aggression being more geared towards action horror, but I'll explain what I mean first. I'll go through the areas one by one. The Wrenwood Hotel, you only see this place for like a few minutes before moving on. The Rhodes Hill Care Facility, this area is the spot you'll spend most of the time, but it's split into 4 sections, and aside from the main area, there isn't much to see. The starting area intro with the girl is more focused on showing off the girl than the care center. The basement doesn't feel interesting at all, it's just a bunch of junk thrown about. The courtyard and lab just has a ton of zombies, blood, and random science junk that just becomes a walking simulator immediately. And that just leads you to a small church, which isn't interesting whatsoever, and it leads to the water treatment facility, which is just as exciting as it sounds. Next we have Raccoon City, which is now a wasteland packed with zombies, and while having a few little side paths, it ultimately feels very stale environment-wise, to the point I felt like it overstayed its welcome. After that we have the RPD/daycare, which are about as interesting as an old shoe aside from the fan service. And finally the ARC lab, which is probably one of the blandest labs we've seen so far. Out of these, like I said, the care facility definitely has most in terms of exploration, but almost every other part, aside from a few small exceptions, feel very unimaginative. Just simple locations to help you from A to B, which, keep in mind, is the majority of the locations. The last and final part of my complaint is possibly my largest point, and I don't think many have considered: the storyline and how it affects the future games. The main storyline in RE9 is very standalone. The 2 antagonists, Zeno and Gideon, die and are introduced and die. God damn it. Alright, fuck that. We're gonna leave it in. Either way, they get introduced and then die in the same game. The virus Leon has is revealed in this game and is healed in this game. Grace is introduced and her storyline probably ends here, and every other small issue brought up is contained. Nothing is brought from the previous games, and from what it seems like, nothing will carry on from it. Now, that's all fine and dandy. My only issue is that they give us large pieces of fan service that, unless Capcom want to retcon, the story will be permanent. Raccoon City is my largest complaint, and that goes with the RPD. These locations that are so beloved have been shown in a very quick and dull way. In case I'm not being clear about what I mean, I'm saying that by showing us a wasteland Raccoon City, all we will see from it from now on is a wasteland. Same goes for the RPD. These locations had a lot of potential, but now they've been shown to be nothing but rubble. If you still enjoy the fan service, I'd like to ask you a question. Do you think these areas could have been brought back in a more enjoyable way? To me, the answer is yes. I think if given enough time, there would have been plenty of ideas on how to reintroduce these areas in a better way. Maybe a section of the RPD miraculously managed to avoid the nuke and has been taken over by Gideon, leading the player through reminiscent halls as they make their ways to Gideon. Instead, we get rubble. No mystery, no adventure, no fun aside from the fan service of the RPD. What if the same were to happen from the Spencer Mansion? What if in the next game you stomp around the Spencer Mansion rubble for like, 5 minutes and then move on? Like, knowing there will never be anything more to the mansion than what you've already seen? To me, these half-assed fan service attempts just feel like thrown away potential to a beloved location. Now, I realize, while I state it as being the strongest point, it comes off as very nitpicky. To me, I felt very sad at the way Raccoon City was shoehorned in, and I felt like the biggest slap in the face the game offered. Now, to my smaller issues. 1. Leon's shop sucks and isn't very useful. 2. Grace constantly pants, regardless of what health you have, and it got on my nerves to the point I turned off dialogue to stop hearing her groan into my ears every 2 seconds. Like, let me play a clip here. There is no setting to turn this off aside from dialogue, which sucks because the voice acting is great in this game, but I just can't deal with the constant groans and pants. Alright, either way. On to number 3. This game would benefit greatly from a hard mode to start with. The game felt way too easy and less interesting because of the lack of any real difficulty. 4. Like I said, Leon's parts in Raccoon City in particular just aren't very interesting. I feel more dragged out than anything at some parts. 5. The trophies feel underwhelming for the platinum. I got the platinum and just aside from insanity mode, there wasn't much interesting things. 6. Having the girl not one-hit you makes almost all of her intense moments dissipate as you can just tank a hit and run. But there is one thing specific with the girl that I mentioned, and that is insanity mode. Coming from Village of Shadows in RE8, I expected a relatively easy time, but boy was I mistaken. This mode was just the challenge I was looking for, and I found most of my enjoyment with the game from this mode. The girl felt way more threatening since she becomes a one-hit kill, and Leon sections in particular felt gruesomely hard, even with infinite ammo. So far, I'd say it's the best hard mode I've played in Resident Evil. Now, I have some closing words. If you enjoyed RE9 and hated every point I've made, more power to you. I made this video because I wanted my opinions to be heard, since I think there's needs to be opposition in game development if we want game devs to refine their games. I truly enjoyed RE9 and I thought it was a good game, up there with RE7 in my opinion, but I think my points are what contribute to the main complaint of the game being it isn't very replayable. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more of these style videos, let me know. This is my first time doing something like this with like a script and everything, so tell me how I did. Either way, I'm out. Peace.